This material has been reproduced and communicated to you by or on behalf of Deakin University in accordance with Section 113P of the Copyright Act 1968. The material in this communication may be subject to copyright under the Act. Any further reproduction or communication of this material by you may be the subject of copyright protection under the Act. Do not remove this notice.
By pound.
Lord, oh, there's no host key. I take it you don't have the host key, yeah?
See, as I said, it's always just started automatically.
Yeah.
Probably this is starting a second. I know it probably shouldn't, but it does. Or it has.
Okay.
This is probably just starting a second thing.
All right, that's not working because you still need to sign as the host. So it's this one here, isn't it?
Today, 11 a.m. Yes.
Recording in progress.
Okay, now see if there are any students. Okay, Kundali, can you hear me and see me, please? Or anyone? Marmy, Agnes, Nick.
Sorry, what was that?
Can you can hear me?
Yeah,
Can
perfectly.
you see anything on a...
No video though.
Slide?
Yeah. Can you guys see the Word document?
And shouldn't it be PC?
Yeah.
Okay, students accessing remotely, can you see a PowerPoint document now?
It's blank, it's black. Nothing.
Oh, because we haven't shared it.
Share screen. And the PowerPoint, please. Okay, right, can you see a PowerPoint slide now?
Yes.
Good. And all the screens? Good.
I can't do anything about your video. Okay. Simply because we don't have that host key.
Well, what video? What video do I need? They can see the slide.
Yes, they can see the slides, they can hear
That's
you,
all
but
they
they
need.
won't be able to see you.
They don't have to see me in person.
Okay.
All right, thanks. I'll get on with it.
No worries.
Thank you. Can you see? It's got to be simpler than this.
Yes, yeah.
This
definitely.
is rubbish. This is absolute
They
rubbish.
should definitely give you the host key as part of the thing.
You know, but I normally don't need a host key. It's just these endless complications, you know?
Yeah.
It's no good. All right. Okay, everyone, let's begin. I'm sorry I'm a few minutes late. Oh, not too bad. Guys, please, I need you to stop talking right now. Guys, hey, I need you to stop talking right now, okay? Please. Okay, we'll begin with the usual acknowledgement of traditional landowners. Deakin Business School would like to acknowledge the site of the Burwood campus is located on the land of the Wurundjeri people. The Geelong Waterfront campus is located on the land of the Wathaurong people, and the Warrnambool campus is located on the land of the Gunditjmara people. They belong to these lands, have walked on them for thousands of years, and continue to care for them and nurture them. Okay, we're into week 3. Please note carefully that for this first assignment, the relevant topics are topics 1 and 2, not topic 3. So the content from here on should not appear in your first assignment. All right, the next slide is a recap, just looking at what we looked at last week. I won't go over that. Today, you'll see that there are topic 3. There's a lot to get through. I have to get through fairly quickly. Consideration. It starts simply, but it can get complicated very quickly. Contractual capacity. Please keep, with consideration, it's what the other party does in return. Okay, it's what the other party does in return. Always remember that. Next, contractual capacity. Please keep in mind this. Capacity is relevant when one of the parties is under the age of 18 or they are otherwise mentally impaired because they're on drugs, alcohol, they're sick, they've had a hit to their head, they're in an accident. Okay, nothing to do with physical capacity, it's to do with mental because it's relevant to whether the party can understand the obligations of the contract that they're getting into. I'll just say that we have the PowerPoint slides, but also on Cloud Deacon, next to these PowerPoint slides, I'll put an extra document that I'll come to. I'll just show you. All right. All right, that's the week 3 page for this subject. If you scroll down, you'll see the normal PowerPoint slides, but you'll see immediately under it that there's an extra document that I've uploaded. It's a Word document. That's what it looks like. It's just got a few extra notes to help you understand better. Okay, so I'll be referring to that sometime. I'll come back to the PowerPoint slides now. All right, here we go. Consideration. Let me move that out of the way. Right, all simple contracts, that means a contract that is not a deed. All simple contracts must be supported by consideration to be valid. Consideration means something of value, but it need not be. Guys, can we please come on time, everyone? Do you see the constant interruptions when we're trying to start this class? How I get about 2 sentences in, the door's open, someone else comes in. Okay? We go a bit more in, doors open, someone else comes in. Do you see how it breaks the concentration? Okay? Please, everyone, try and come on time, okay? All right, consideration, something of value, it doesn't need to be fair exchange. What that means is that the consideration does not have to be market price or anywhere near it. For example, you could have a $1 million property that's worth $5 million. You could agree to sell it to someone for $1 and there would be no problem with consideration. If the purchaser, seller and buyer agreed on $1, it's perfectly valid. Okay, it doesn't have to be market price. It's usually money, but it doesn't have to be. I promise to do something for you, paint your house, if you promise to replace my roof. No money involved. It doesn't have to be money. Okay. Please note a gratuitous promise. What does that mean? A gratuitous promise means something given for free. In other words, a gift. If I promise to give you my mobile phone on Friday, I promise, I can put my promise in writing and I could say on my best honour and all of that, but I don't ask anything in return. I just promise to give it to you. On Friday, let's say I then change my mind. You cannot sue me for breach of contract. There was no contract because there was no consideration. My promise to do something for nothing in return can be labelled a gratuitous promise, meaning a promise with no value for free. And that means there's no consideration. Okay. As I said before, consideration must have some value, but it need not be adequate. It doesn't have to be market price, but it must be capable of identification. It must be capable of identification. I'd also say it must be capable of being measured. For example, I promise to paint your house. In return, I ask you to promise me to help me out one day in future. Now, your promise to help me out one day in future is too uncertain, too vague, it cannot be measured, it would not be valid consideration. Okay? So cannot be uncertain, it must be capable of being measured. All right. All right, this next point here, number 3, means consideration need not pass back to the offeror. For example, I could say to you, I offer to paint your house if in return you promise to pay $10,000 to that person over there. Now that's perfectly valid. Consideration doesn't have to come back to me. I can say that consideration be paid to someone else. It's perfectly valid. All right. This is, it must not be past consideration. Ross Caller and Thomas, very famous and important case. I'll tell you basically what happened. It was over 100 years ago, well over 100 years ago, when people were buying, there was a person who wanted to buy a horse. It was very important in those days. Horses were like what we use cars and trucks for. They were important animals. And a person wanted to buy a horse. Went to a horse seller, they saw a horse, identified, and the price was fine, and they agreed. Okay, so the purchaser said, I offer to buy this horse for £100, whatever the money was. Agreed, fine. Contract entered into. After that, the purchaser then had a question. The purchaser then thought, what about the temperament of the horse? Because the horse, he needed the horse to be able to put ropes around the horse, to have the horse work for him, carry carts and things like that. See what I mean? Please try and come on time. Okay? Phone's off, please come on time. And so the purchaser then, after the contract was entered into, then asked the question of the seller, does this horse have a good temperament? Meaning, will it behave me? Will it obey me? Will it behave? The seller said, yes, it does. I promise it does. The purchaser said, great, thank you, and brought the horse home. You know what's going to happen. The horse did not behave. He could not manage the horse. He couldn't put ropes around the horse and get the horse to obey him. So he went back to the seller and said, you've breached the contract. You promised that the horse had a good nature, and it doesn't. The matter went to court. The court disagreed with the purchaser. The court said the promise about the temperament of the horse is what is known as past consideration, and past consideration is not valid. What did that mean? The parties had already made their agreement. This horse for that amount of money, agreed. Now the promise about the temperament of the horse, that was a promise that was made after the contract had been entered into. And there was nothing given in exchange for that promise. And so therefore it was the promise about the horse's temperament. It was not a contractual promise at all. Okay? It's in your textbook. Please be aware of that. Very important. Because that is a general rule. past consideration is not valid consideration. That is a general rule. Now we're going to look at exceptions, and you'll see this pattern over and over again. We have general rules in law, but we have exceptions that apply in certain circumstances only. So now we're looking at exceptions to that past consideration rule. Now we're going to look at a case, it's called the Pao-on case. And Lao Yu Long, I think it was from Hong Kong or Malaysia. It was appealed to the Privy Council in England, and it's accepted in our legal system. The facts of the matter, I've copied and pasted from the textbook into this Word document that I pointed out to you a few moments ago. So there's a mistake, which we'll get to shortly, the Pao-on case. Now, I've just copied and pasted from the textbook, as I say, and there's the page references. Basically, what happened is this is the situation. Let's say I say to you, please come and do this work on Saturday. I don't say anything about a reward. I just say, come and help me this Saturday. You come and you do that. You help me on the Saturday. After you finish the work, I then say to you, that was fantastic. I'm so pleased with what you did. I'm going to give you $1,000 for what you did. Then later on, I change my mind. Now, according to the law of contract, the law of consideration, past consideration, you would have no right to get that $1,000 because you completed the task before any money was offered to you. And so past consideration would prevent you from having a right to that money. Now that is basically the situation that happened in this Pao-on case. And the textbook, this here, I've just copied from the textbook. It said, imagine a person who works at a university is asked by her boss to work on the weekend. She does that. After she's finished the work, the boss says, congratulations, I'm so happy, you'll get this extra you'll get this money. Then the boss later doesn't pay. Now that went to the Privy Council. Here we go again. Please come on time, young man. Okay. And these are now the elements. Okay, see how the distraction, everyone's attention goes to the person who comes in the room? Then we have a gap, and I've got to try and get your attention back. Now for the rule, these are the elements for the exception. There must have been an action done at the request of the person making the present promise. In other words, the person went and worked on Saturday because they were asked to do it. And the second element, it must have been in an environment, a context, where the parties expected there to be payment. Please come on time, okay? So it must be in a context, not where you just ask a stranger. There must be context, like someone who was normally employed by Deakin University to work Monday to Friday. They're asked to come and work on Saturday. They would have understood that if Deakin asks them to do work and they are a Deakin employee, that they'd be paid for it. And then finally, the payment must have been legally enforceable had it been promised in advance. So that's another test to put in there. For example, if the boss had said, if you come on Saturday and do the work, I'll give you $1,000. Yes, that would be legally enforceable. Therefore, that element is met as well. All right. And there it is applied. The lady worked at the boss's request. There would have been an understanding that she wouldn't work for nothing, and the promise would have been enforceable had it made before the act in question. So that, I'll stop that share. can come back to the PowerPoints. Okay. So there you are. That's the first, that's the exception, the power on case. Now here, number 5, that point 5, please note this: performing an existing public or contractual obligation is not good consideration. For example, if I went to you and said, I will lecture you in contract law from 11 o'clock till 12:30, 12:20 today if you pay me $20 or $200, and you agree. And then I do that. And then if I come to you and say, right, I've done it, please pay me the money that you agreed to pay. You would rightly say, Anthony, there was no, that consideration, even though we both promised. Please note this, we both agreed to pay that money, but that consideration is not valid as far as the law is concerned. Why? Because I am under an existing contractual obligation to Deakin University to teach you law between 11 and 12:20. I'm already under an obligation in my work contract with Deakin to do this work. I hope you understand that. So if someone is doing something under a contract, but they were already obliged to do that. Young lady, please come on time. Okay. And look, if you are late, and sometimes you'll be late because you can't help it, the bus breaks down or whatever, there are stairs at the back. Please try, there's back entrance stairs. Please try and come at the back so that you don't distract the whole class. Okay. All right. Another thing is that's a private contractual obligation. Another is existing public obligation. For example, if you say to the police, offer to pay the money to the police if the police do their job, that's not valid consideration because the police are already under an existing obligation to do their work. Okay? So if police see an offer of a reward, if they see it, they find the lost property, they return the lost property, they have no right to get the reward because the police are already under an obligation to do many things, including return lost property. All right. Now here, this is important, and this gets into another, this will become complicated quickly, so please stay with me here. Part payment of a debt, folks and beer. Okay. You had a situation. Let's say that last year I lent you money. I lent you $1,000 to be paid at 10% in return to me, 10% interest every month. Now 6 months have gone by and you say, Anthony, I can't pay, I haven't got any more money. Or you might say this, Anthony, I can give you back 500, but that's all I can do. Anthony, if I give you 500 now, will you, in return, say to me that the debt is completely paid? Let's say I agree to that. That's what happened in Folks and Beer. But the person in my position sometime later said, no, I've changed my mind. Pay me the rest. And if you don't, and I know, all right, we go to court. Now I say in court, I lent this other person $1,000 to be paid in, this interest over this time, and they've only paid me 500. I want the rest. The other person said, Anthony promised that once he got half the amount, that he would say that the contract is paid in full. The court sided with the person in my position. the court said, if you dropped, if the debtor, the person in your position, only gave 500, not 1,000, then you got a benefit. But what benefit did I get in return? Nothing. I was already entitled to 500. I was entitled to 1,000. So the rule came, part payment is not good consideration for full, for the wiping of the debt. The court said consideration would have been valid if you had said, Anthony, I can't pay the full 1,000. I can give you 500, and I'll do something else that I never promised to do, like come around and clean your windows. Then I'm getting something else, something different. Consideration then would have been valid. You see, you've got to concentrate on this. It can get complicated. And the first time you hear it and read it, it might not be that clear. But it's like saying, okay, you pay me half what you owe me. All right, and in return, what do I get? Nothing. Remember, that goes against what a contract is. I do something for you, and in return, I get something. I forgive your debt, and in return, I must get something that I otherwise wouldn't have had. So here, the court said there was no consideration for forgiving the debt. There was no consideration for forgiving the debt. Therefore, the debtor has to pay the entire amount. Now, please note that there are some exceptions to that. One is promissory estoppel that we'll be coming to shortly. But the first one here is what is known as, and I'm looking for the heading, practical benefit. So please note this, practical benefit. Now, this is an exception that would help the person who was in that debtor position. But it needs some explanation. Now, this rule, this exception, is relatively new. It was only created in England in 1990. Now, some laws of contract go back hundreds and hundreds of years. This is only, 34 years old, 33. And it was only adopted in Australia 4 years later. This is how it works. I'll give you another example. Let's say that I bake cakes, I bake wedding cakes, and you're going to have a wedding. And we enter into a contract, we entered into a contract last Friday because your wedding is this Saturday. And you're going to pay me good money for me to make you a grand wedding cake. Now, I'm having problems getting the cake ready on time. If you say to me, Anthony, we had already agreed on it, this cake for $1,000. I was going to make you this grand, beautiful cake, $1,000. We agreed on that. And it was going to be ready by this Friday. Now, let's say you had said to me, and now I've said, look, I'm having trouble getting the supplies. I might not have the cake ready for your wedding. You're very upset. If you said to me, Anthony, if I give you extra money, doesn't matter how much it is, but you say to me, all right, let's say $400. Anthony, if I give you an extra $400, can you get the wedding? Can I be sure that you'll get the cake ready on time? And I say yes. And let's say then I do have the cake ready on time. And you pay me the original amount, $1,000. Then I say to you, well, what about the other 400 that you agreed to? Now, under the law of past consideration, both two things, past consideration and existing obligation, but just simply on past consideration, I have no legal, applying the normal rule of past consideration, I have no right to the extra money. Why not? What do you get? You get a cake. And what do I get in return? $1,000. We'd already agreed on that. You've paid promised to pay an extra $400. Do you get 40% more cake? No, you still get the same cake. So under the law of past consideration, that promise for extra $400 is not valid because it's not offset by any consideration for that 400. But this new rule, new exception, the practical benefits test, works in this way. The court will consider as identify in that situation that there is consideration. What is the consideration? It's a practical benefit. What do you mean? It means you've avoided having a problem of a wedding. Please try and come on time, young lady, okay? What is that new benefit? The new benefit is that you've avoided having a wedding ceremony without a cake. You've gained a practical benefit, or you've avoided this problem. You've avoided having your wedding ruined. That's the practical benefit. But please note, it would not work this way. Imagine the same situation. We agreed last Friday that I would bake a cake for you for your wedding, $1,000. It's cut, and for this Saturday. Now it's Friday or Thursday night, and I telephone you and say, I'm having problems getting your cake ready. Give me more money. Let's say that you said, all right, I agree. Here's another $500. You see how I could take advantage of that? I could then say, well, this is great, this game of making cakes. You have the cake, but you tell them the night before that there's going to be a problem, and they've got no obligation. And of course they'll pay more money, and the court will back me up. No, the court will not permit this test, this exception, if there's any possibility that one side could be extorting the other side. In other words, taking unfair advantage of the other side. Otherwise, everyone, oh, you need something done by this time? Great. I'm just going to ring you the night before, say I can't do it, and I'll ask for you the triple money, and the court will back me up. So it depends on who it is who's making the promise. Please note that. Now, for advanced students, that's all you need to know, the average student. But for the advanced student, I'll point this out. This new rule has yet to go to the High Court. The High Court of Australia may say this practical benefits test is not good law. It's rubbish. Or they may say, no, it's fine. Or they may say it is part of Australian law, but we're putting extra elements in. That might happen. But you see, the courts can't decide a matter unless someone brings the matter to the court. That's how it works. But no one yet has gone to the High Court to see whether the High Court is happy with this. You don't have to know that, but an advanced student might just point out, however, as you see here, it remains to be seen whether the appellate courts, in other words, the High Court, approves of it. If you write that in your answer, it's just a benefit for you. All right, I'll continue on. Now, as I've mentioned before, there are contracts which are known as deeds. There's a picture of one. Well, that's what they used to look like. You see that document? It's been written. Underneath it is red tape. On those tapes are seals, official seals. That's an example of a seal. Today it's done electronically, but a deed must be signed and it must be witnessed by at least one person who is not a party to it. You're probably never going to see one in your life. But just know that they do exist. And if you do have a deed, it doesn't matter. There can be consideration in it. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't matter. It doesn't need to be consideration for it to be valid. But please don't make this mistake that students think. You type something up on your laptop, you print it off, both parties sign. Is that a deed? No, it is not. A deed is much more than just being in writing and printed and signed. All right. Now this is another exception, promissory estoppel. Now please be with me here because some students have traditionally found this confusing. It doesn't have to be, so I'll explain it as clearly as I can, but I need you to stay focused. So it's an exception to consideration, but it's an exception not just to consideration, it's an exception to other elements as well. Perhaps it helps if I first tell you the story of what happened. And then I'll come back to this previous slide. Waltons were department stores, like Myers, David Jones, JB Hi-Fi. They operated in Australia. They've gone now. They had shops in where Target is in Burke Street. That was a Waltons store. They had department stores in the capital cities of Australia. Now, at one time in the late 70s or early 1980s, they thought about setting up department stores in regional cities like Geelong or Ballarat. They went to a regional city in New South Wales, Kiama I think it was called, it doesn't matter. And they looked around and thought, if we had a shop in this town, where would we put the shop? They saw one location and they thought, that's a great spot, but the building is no good. Who owns, and they thought, we don't want to spend the money to buy a building ourselves. If we have a shop here, we'd rent it from someone. But the building has to suit our needs. So they found out the owner of a building on a particular block. They approached that owner and said, hi, we're from Waltons, the department stores. How would you like it if we were your tenant, if we rented your shop? And the owners, who were called the Ma, Mr. and Mrs. Ma, they thought that would be fantastic. We would love it. We would welcome it. Walton said, well, we would need, your building though was no good. You would have to pull the building down and rebuild it in a different way, perhaps multi-level escalators. It would have to be very different. Waltons would have to pay money. They would have to close the current shop, pay someone to pull down that building, which is not cheap. They would have to get permits, architectural drawings, and then get construction for a new shop. It would cost a lot of time. It would cost them a lot of money. But the family thought it would be worth it if they had their tenant being a major department store. And so they're just talking, and then Walton said, we would need to be ready by February of next year to start going. The doors of our shop would have to open up by just some months away. Now for Ma, the owners, Mr. and Mrs. Ma, M-A-H-E-R, that meant that didn't give them long. They were happy to proceed, but it meant that time would be tight because Walton said, if it's not ready by then, it's no good. So Ma said, well, where do we sign? Because the contract had to be in writing. It was for land and lease. Those contracts must be in writing. Now Ma's filled out the contract signed and gave it to Waltons and said, well, please accept. Because so Ma made the offer and they put it to Waltons and Waltons had to sign to accept. And they waited and they waited. Now, representatives of Walton's store said, look, it's with the boss, the manager in Sydney. He will sign it. He's going to sign it very soon. It's going to happen. You're going to get the signature. Time went on. It still hadn't been signed. And Walton said, don't worry, it's going to happen. So Ma said, all right, well, we'll take your word for it. They started pulling down their own building. Waltons saw that. Waltons saw that Ma were acting under a contract that had not yet been entered into. They were spending money pulling down their own building. Waltons could see what was happening. Days went by, weeks went by, and then the representative contacted Ma and said, the managing director in Sydney has finally made a decision. The answer is no. We're not going ahead with it. Thank you. All the best. Goodbye. Now, could Ma sue for breach of contract? No, because there was no contract ever entered into. What happened then was there had been in 1947 in England, a new rule was established. There it was called promissory estoppel. Now that brought about a remedy in England when you had a situation where a party had no remedy because there was no consideration in a contract that they entered into a contract or thought they had, but consideration was considered to be past consideration. Therefore, it was not valid consideration. They had no remedy. In England, this new rule, promissory estoppel, was established in this case, High Trees case, in 1947. Now that rule was followed in Australia in this case at the High Court. It is definitely, clearly now part of Australian law. Promissory estoppel. You could just say estoppel. Now, what are the elements? These are the elements. These must be met. Now, if you just look at them alone, you might find it a bit confusing. That's why what I'm now going to do is share with you some text from the textbook that shows you how those rules were applied. Just a moment. Okay, so we're coming back to that Word document and about halfway, and there it is, about halfway down. I've just copied and pasted from textbook, page 110, 111. For promissory estoppel to apply, these elements must be met. The promisee assumed, that is, the people in the Mr. and Mrs. Ma's position, they assumed that a legal relationship existed or it would exist. Now that's applied to the facts in these brackets. The parties, that is Waltons and Ma, had been in negotiations for a long time. And there were clear indications from Waltons that a legal relationship would exist because they kept saying, we are going to accept your offer, meaning that we are going to be in a contract with you. So that's that first element. Either a legal relationship like a contract existed or that it would. And that the promisor, Waltons, they're the ones who induced that presumption, that assumption or expectations. They were the ones who kept saying, it's going to happen, it's going to happen. Next, the promisee, that is Mr. and Mrs. Ma, they either withheld from acting or either they did act or they withheld from acting in reliance on that expectation. And here, they did rely, they did act. They pulled down their own building in reliance of that promise. Next, the promisor knew that the promisee, Ma, intended to act in that way. Waltons could see with their own eyes Ma was starting to pull down their own shop. Next, the promisee must suffer a detriment, material loss. In other words, they must be worse off as a result. Here they were worse off. They had spent money on people who did demolition work to destroy their own asset. And here there must be something unfair about what was going on. And here it was unfair, and unconscionable is the word meaning unfair, the more formal term, meaning it would be unfair for Waltons to be watching Ma destroy their own asset when Waltons knew they had not made up their mind about entering into the contract. The court said, yes, that is an unfair situation. All those elements are met. All right. Now, with the facts on the High Trees case, the facts are a little bit different, but I can discuss those in the seminar, in the tutorial, both online and in person here on Friday. So online tomorrow night and in person on Friday. I'll just say very quickly, this is what happened. Very quickly. It was London and it was during the war. The city's being bombed like Kiev has been bombed recently. There are people who are living in houses renting flats. They don't want to stay in London while London is being bombed. So they're abandoning the flat. The people who own, the landlords, are thinking, well, we need this income. And our tenants are just abandoning the city. So they said to the tenants, if you promise to stay, we'll promise to reduce the rent by 50%. And they did. The war ended, and then the landlords wanted to put the rent back to the original price. And the tenants didn't like that. They wanted to stay on a lower price. It went to court. The court said it's perfectly valid to go back to the original price going forward. Now, legally, under the law of contract, the landlords would have been perfectly entitled to say, all that rent that we said, that 50% off rent that you didn't have to pay through the war years, we now want it. Even though we said we didn't. Even though we said you don't have to pay, we've changed our mind and we want it. Just like Folks and Beer with the payment of the debt. The court said, yes, you can, that's how the law of contract works, that's how the law of consideration works, but we're now going to bring in a new rule in 1947 called estoppel. This is what estoppel really means. It sounds like the word stop, because it means that if estoppel applies, a person is stopped from doing something that they're otherwise permitted to do under law. So it's like saying you would be permitted to get all that money back, but we are stopping you. We are preventing you from being able to take advantage of that right. That's what promissory estoppel does. And so the tenants had to pay full rent going forward, but the landlord was estopped, in other words, prevented from getting the money that they didn't have to pay during the war. That's all I have, and that's it. I think we've got a question similar to that in the seminar next week. All right. So maybe I don't have to explain that on the seminar after all. That's it. But that's where the rule was established first in England, 1947, but it was applied in different circumstances in Australia here in that Waltons case. All right. Now, there have been other situations, for example, here, Crown Casino in Melbourne. Crown own the complete complex. Now, there are other hotels there as well, Cosmopolitan Hotel or something like that. And Crown is the landlord. Crown said to the Cosmopolitan, please spend your own money on renovating the hotel. If you do, we will look favourably upon you when it comes time to renew your lease. So the owners of that, operator of that other hotel did that. And then when it came to renew the lease, Crown said, no, we're not renewing the lease. Cosmopolitan Hotel, the landlord, tried to get a remedy under promissory estoppel. They were unsuccessful. Because here, the elements, there must have been a promise made, a clear promise. Now, Waltons had made a clear promise of entering into a contract. But in Crown, the promise wasn't clear. Crown just said, we'll look favourably upon you. They didn't say, if you renovate your place, we promise to give you a new lease. We promise to enter into a contract like Waltons did. They just said, we promise to look favourably upon you. The court said, that's not clear enough. All right, let me draw a line under that. We're finished now with consideration. Now it's the next element, capacity. Please note this means, as I said before, the intellectual capacity of a person to enter into a contract. It comes under this big heading, genuine consent, because a court will not uphold a contract if the court is not convinced that the parties to the contract genuinely consented to be bound by the contract. Now, that consent will be in question in some circumstances. We'll look at them shortly. This is one of them. If there's a question as to the capacity, mental capacity, now that will be an issue, as I said before, if one of the parties is a child under the age of 18. Now, it doesn't mean that children can't enter into valid contracts. They can, but there are limitations, and we'll see what they are. This is basically it here. There are two classes of contracts which are binding. If you've got an exam question, an assignment question, and one of the parties is a minor, they're 17, 16, 15 or younger, please ask yourself, are the facts indicating that this minor is buying something, buying goods or services? Because if so, this is the test. Is it a contract for necessaries? Today we would say necessities, but we still use the term that entered into the legal framework hundreds of years ago. We'd say necessaries. That's if the minor is buying goods or services. But please note, if the minor is entering employment, getting a job, like an apprenticeship or any job, it's a different test. Then the test is that employment contract what is classed as a beneficial contract of service? There are different tests. Please don't confuse the two. We'll look at more detail about how those rules work. All right. I think there's a comment from someone. Sorry, aren't I sharing the... I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm very sorry about that. All right.
All good. Thank
Great. Okay. So what I just showed was on slide 15, slide 15, the two tests, necessaries for goods and services, beneficial contracts of service if it's employment. All right. Now, if we look at people where they're not children, they're adults, but they have been under the influence of drugs or alcohol, or they've just had a car accident or a sporting injury to the head. And they enter into a contract while they're in that condition. Then they may be able to walk away from that contract. They may be free from that contract if they can establish two things. The first is easy. They just have to persuade the court that they were incapable of understanding the nature of what they were getting into because they were drunk. But this is trickier for them. The other party must have been aware, or the other party should have been aware, that they were dealing with someone who was affected by drugs or alcohol or had a hit to the head. Now, if you bought something from a shop in person, you might be able to get CCTV footage, and if you can show that you are unsteady on your feet, and here's the shop assistant right in front of you, then the court might say, well, it's clear. The shop assistant should have known, would have known, should have known that they were dealing with someone who was affected. But if you buy something online, Amazon, buy a ticket with Qantas, go and buy a business class fare to Los Angeles or something, tens of thousands I don't know. The web page can't tell whether, they don't even know if you're a real person. Are you even a robot? Are you even a human being? They've got no way of knowing whether you're drunk or on drugs. So you enter into the contract on that basis, I'm sure you'd be bound. Okay. Bankrupts, don't worry about that. You can read that yourself, it's no big deal. Now, this is another big area that we're getting into. Agreements must be genuine consent. We now get into these other big areas. I'll start with mistake. So I'll jump down here. We'll be coming at these other things, misrepresentation, shortly. Okay. Now you might see that here's an element of contract. There must have been no mistake. If there was the doctrine of mistake applies, the contract is void or perhaps voidable. Now you might think, oh, that's great. I went to the shop because I thought I'd run out of toothpaste. I bought some toothpaste. I got home and I realised, oh, there was the toothpaste after all. I didn't see it. So I bought it by mistake. Can I get out of the contract? No, not at all. It is very difficult to get out of a contract on the basis of mistake. It's very, very restrictive. It will only apply to a few circumstances that don't happen that often. And here are the types: common mistake, mutual, unilateral. What does it mean? That's why I'm now going to go into the Word document and show you quickly some examples of what these mean. Now again, this is just copied and pasted from the textbook. But this hopefully will make it a bit easier for you. Common mistake. See, textbook, TB is textbook. Let's say that you've got two people, John and Lily. John enters into a contract with Lily to sell the car to Lily. Now, he didn't know and she didn't know that before they completed the contract, the car was destroyed by fire. So they enter into a contract to buy a car. What's the mistake? The car doesn't exist. But he didn't know that, she didn't know that. That's a common mistake. The contract then, the law would say there is no contract, it's void. No one sues anyone. Walk away, go home. Mutual mistake. What does that mean? Well, both parties are making a mistake, but they're different mistakes. Here, the contract is over the purchase of a boat. Now, one party thinks the boat is registered, but it isn't registered. So there's their mistake. But the other person thinks that the boat is seaworthy when it isn't seaworthy. So they're both under a mistaken understanding, but over completely different matters. That's a mutual mistake. In that case, the law would say the contract's at an end. Now, a unilateral mistake, only one party has made a mistake. The other party is aware of it, but they keep quiet because they're getting an unfair advantage out of it. For example, Taylor and Johnson. A lady agrees to sell her land for $15,000. She's got acres and acres and acres and acres. She thinks $15,000 per acre. But it's actually written down $15,000 for the lot. He knows, the purchaser, that the seller is under a mistake, is mistaken. But he doesn't say to her, I'm sorry, madam, but you're under a mistake. It's $15,000 for the lot, not $15,000 each. He doesn't say that because he's going to get an advantage out of it, get the land that much more cheaply. He keeps quiet. He takes unfair advantage of her mistake. That is unilateral mistake. Okay. So it is possible for those to apply, but they're very narrow, restricted situations. All right, I'll stop that share and I'll come back to the PowerPoint slides. All right. So I've gone through the example that I gave you, common mistake. Oh, and by the way here, a mistake about quality is not good enough, is not enough. You go to a gallery and you see a painting and it's by someone who's very famous and $1 million and you agree to buy it. You bring it home and then you find out later it says by Leonardo da Vinci, but it's a forgery. It wasn't by Leonardo da Vinci at all. It's by some guy down at St Kilda and it's only worth $10. Doctrine of mistake will not apply because here the law says mistake as to the quality of the subject matter is not sufficient, is not enough. You bought a painting, you've got a painting. Whether the fact that it was by Leonardo da Vinci is a matter of quality. You're not going to get a remedy under the doctrine of mistake. All right. I've gone through those other areas. I gave you those examples. Now, there's something else that is part of mistake, but it's called non est factum, which is Latin for it is not my deed, it's not my thing. Now, this occurs, for example, someone signs a document. I'll give you an example for Petlin and Cullen. I come up to you, you can't speak, your mother tongue is not English. You can't read English very well, maybe not at all. And I come up to you and I say, please sign this. You say, what is it? You're dependent on me to tell you what it is because you can't read it yourself. And I know that. And I say, oh, it's all right. Look, it's just to say that I gave you $10 and that you accepted and you've received the $10. So please sign here just to show that you've got the $10. And you think, oh, all right, that's fine. And you do that. But the writing actually says, I hereby transfer my $1 million property to Anthony. Now, years ago, the vast majority of people in Australia, in European countries, everywhere in the world, could not read and write. They were never taught to. You only had to go to primary school from about the 1850s. And what for? Reading, write, get out there and plough the paddocks and milk the cows. You don't need to read a book as to how to milk a cow. I'll show you. So when it came to things like buying land, people relied on other people to read out the facts and tell them what it is. And people often just mark with an X. Okay. I can speak about 5 or 6 languages, including Japanese and Chinese. If I go back to my great-grandparents who came here in the gold rush from Ireland, none of them could read or write because they hadn't been told to. They were supposed to be farm workers in Ireland. So, you know, they were totally dependent on someone else telling them what they did that they were signing. So here, the doctrine of mistake would apply under this rule called non est factum. But you must have someone who cannot read it themselves. If they could read but they were too lazy or they didn't bother, they can't rely on this rule. Okay? I'll continue. Now, we're on another area again. There's a lot of content this week. Representations. In next week, I think, or soon, I'm going to be explaining to you the difference between a term and a representation. A term is a promise contained within a contract. Now, let's say I say this to you. Everyone, please note this very carefully. We're in a private sale. Consumer laws, which I'll teach you in a few weeks, won't apply. So we're just relying on these sorts of rules. I offered to sell you my phone for $400. It is 5G. You agree, you buy it, you open it up, and it's not 5G. It's only 4G. Did I breach the contract? The question is, was it a term of the contract that the phone be 5G? What do you mean a term? Did I promise that the phone was 5G? Because if the court is convinced that my statement about the phone being 5G was a promise, then it's a term. And if you get the phone and it's not 5G, you can sue me for breach of contract. But not everything that was said before a contract was entered into will become a binding term. Because what I said to you is, it is a 5G. I did not say I promise it's 5G, or I guarantee that it's 5G, or I warrant that it's 5G, or I assure, or any words that add up to promise. If I just said it is 5G, the court might say that's not enough to be a term. Well, then what is it? Is it anything? Yes, it's a representation, which, if incorrect, is a misrepresentation. All right, I bought this, you bought the phone. I said it was 5G and it isn't. The court has now said that my statement was not a term, it was only a representation, which is incorrect, an incorrect one, so it's misrepresentation. What remedy? Can you sue me for breach of contract? No, you cannot. Do you have any remedies at all? You might, but it depends on whether I was lying to you, and you can establish that I was lying, and that's not easy, because then it would be fraudulent misrepresentation. If you can't establish that, and I just say, but Your Honour, I thought it was, then it would be innocent misrepresentation. The remedies are fewer, and I'll get to what they are shortly. Negligent, we look at that later in the year. Remember, a mere puff. If I say, look, with this phone, you can contact any person at any place in the world, anywhere, the bottom of the ocean, and you can even talk to someone on the moon and on the planet Venus, then it's starting to sound like exaggerated sales talk. Everyone would know, the average person would know, there's probably no reception on the moon or Venus. So, no. Right. Now, fraudulent. These are the elements. There must have been a statement of fact. Please note this. If I said to you, I'm selling you my 4G, I'm selling you my phone, I think it's 5G. That won't be a term, and it won't even be a representation. It'll be nothing. Why? Because the first element is it must be a statement of fact. And if I said, I think it's 5G, that's not even enough for representation. All right, next, it must be incorrect. Yep. And if it's fraudulently, this is the big thing. You must be able to establish that I was lying. It's not easy. Next element must be that I made the statement because I intended for you to be persuaded by it. If the facts say you are already going to buy this phone anyway, and the phone turns out not to be what you thought it was, you have no remedy under here because you must have been persuaded by my statement. All right. Whereas under innocent, all the elements are same, but you don't have to establish that the person was lying. Negligent, we get to that later in the year. So what are the remedies? All right. Under fraud, you have 2 potential remedies. Under innocent, only 1. Negligent, we'll look at that later in the year. What are the 2 under fraudulent? All right. 1 is you can go to a different area of law, not contract law, tort law. Later on in this subject, we teach you the tort of negligence, but there's defamation, there's trespass, which we don't teach you, and there's the tort of fraud. You can always sue someone under that different area of law if they lied to you and you lost money as a result. You can go down that path. But as far as contract is concerned, you may have the right which is known as rescission, also known as, I hope I'm back on the PowerPoint slides for what you're saying, also known as to rescind, rescission. R-S-C-I-S-S. It's like scissors because it means cut, tear it up. Rescission means the contract is torn up and the parties are put back in the position they were before they entered into the contract. You might think that's great. All I wanted was my money back. You can have your damn phone back. I don't want it. Just give me my money back. Rescission is great. Well, you're not guaranteed to get it. Why not? Because you must be able to hand back the item in the exact same condition that it was in when you got it. And once you found out that it was not 5G, you must not have used it. Because if you keep using it when you find out it's not what it was, then you are accepting the benefit of it, enjoying the benefit of it, and you've lost the right to rescind. Another thing, if you find out that it's not 5G, but you find out in a year or 2 years, the court will say it's too late. You don't have a right to rescission. It's only in certain circumstances. Now, under innocent misrepresentation, rescission is the only possible remedy. See, they're all here. If you become aware, hey, it's not 5G after all, and then you make a call, you've lost the right to rescind. All right. Or if it's just not possible to put it back, let's say it was a car. Or look how it's starting to wear. See this on my phone? How this little thing? Let's say I gave it to you and it was in perfect condition. And then you find out later, 6 months later, that it's not 5G. And you want to rescind it. And I say, look, it wasn't like that when you got it. So no rescission. All right. Now, duress. Okay, these are other areas where the contract can be put aside, void, because the court is not convinced that both parties genuinely consented. Now, duress is fairly easy. Sell me your $1 million property for $100, or else I will kill you, or I will injure you, or your friends and family. All right, or I won't touch you, but I'll lock you in a room and I won't let you out until you sign. False imprisonment. That too is duress. It can be economic duress. Enter into a contract that you don't want to enter into. I won't harm you, I won't lock you up, I won't damage any of your friends, but I will make sure that no one does business with you in this town. That's economic duress. You can read into that. Undue influence. Now here is another area. Let's say that your friend says that your friend has given or sold the friend's car to your friend. Your friend sold his car to his doctor. Oh, your friend has given some or sold some land to the friend's religious advisor. Whoa. The court will presume that your consent was not genuine. You said, yes, I did it. I happily did it. The court will presume that you did so under the influence of that stronger person. If a child gives or sells to the parent, a client to their solicitor, to the lawyer, a patient to the doctor, a person who's attends a church, a temple, a mosque or whatever, to their religious leader, the court will presume that it was that the follower, the patient, the client, the child is in a weaker position and they're influenced by the stronger. And the court will then say to that stronger person, convince us here in the court now that your religious follower or the child or the client, convince us that it was of their own free will. Otherwise, we're reversing that contract. Now, how do you do that? Then the doctor would have to, for example, show that the patient had obtained, first of all, independent legal advice. And then if they still chose to do it, then the court will say, well, that's all right. But that's for certain categories, but not everyone is in that category. Husband and wives are not in that category. People who are just neighbours are not in that category. But here is a famous case, Johnson and Buttress. This is famous because they were not child and parent or anything like that. They were just fellow farmers. But one farmer always relied on the advice of the other. Taxes come in. What do? I have to go and vote. How does that work? I have to pay some bills. I have to get my tax done. What do? They always relied on this other person. Then that weaker person sold some land to the one that they gave advice to. The court said, we're convinced because of the history. You had a history where the weaker one relied on the stronger one. When the weaker then sold land to the stronger, we presume that it was under undue influence. We're tearing it up. Now, this is the last slide, but there's a lot to tell you. Unconscionable conduct, and I'll do it very quickly, and I've only got 3 minutes. This is part of Australian law established in the High Court in relatively recently, 1983. You had two people, elderly. They were born in Italy. They didn't speak good English. They were retired. They didn't have much money. Their only income was the pension, and they've got a grown-up son. The grown-up son says, someone from the bank is going to come around here, Mum and Dad. They've got a contract. They want you to sign the contract. Please sign the contract. The bank comes around. Hello, what's your name? Amadio? Yes, and you're Mrs. Amadio? Okay. Have you had independent legal advice? No. Do you know what's going on? Well, our son told us. And the bank, oh, okay, right, we see what's going on. Have you got any questions? No. Will you sign here? Your son wants you to sign. Are you going to sign? Yeah, here. And they signed. What happened? What was that? What did they sign? If the son had wanted to borrow money from the bank, the bank said, we don't think we'll ever get the money back from you. You don't have enough assets. His credit history is no good. We will lend you money if you get someone to guarantee the loan. What does that mean? Get someone who will say, if the son can't, if this gentleman can't repay the loan, we will. And the guy, who will do that? I know, my parents. The bank went around, knew that what it was dealing with. Elderly people, no independent legal advice. If they have to pay the loan, they'll lose the house. But the bank still said, we're happy to take your signature. Now that happened. The son couldn't repay the loan. The bank said, knock on the door, we're selling your house to get the money. Went to the High Court. The court said, we're applying a new law called unconscionable conduct. Only 3 elements. The first element, one party must be at a special disadvantage. What that is will vary from situation to situation. Here, it was all of those factors put together, not just one. Their age, plus they didn't speak good English, plus they weren't business people, plus they hadn't had legal advice. All those things put them at a special disadvantage. Second element, the bank knew that they were dealing with someone under that special disadvantage. Thirdly, the bank unfairly took advantage of that by saying sign here. And the court said, right, that's unconscionable conduct, and therefore that contract between the bank and the parents is torn up. All right. Now, there have been other cases here. Please read through them, because in some of them, the other person has been successful in having this rule applied to them, and in others, they haven't. Now, this reference to consumer law, we'll get to that in future weeks. But please read Louth and Louth, where they were successful, like the Amadios, and Kakavas, who was a gambler dealing with Crown Casino, and he wasn't successful. So that's for your homework to read through. And there's the homework for next week. Okay, thank you everyone for your attention. That's all we have time for. So everyone, please again next week and at the seminars, please try and come on time. Okay. All right, students accessing remotely. You're okay? All right, unless you have any question now, I'll end the class. I'll end the recording. Okay, thank you. I'll end it now. Thank you. Goodbye. Yep.
Say I am buying an iPhone from Amazon.
Yep.
Okay, but Amazon is like the middleman because the direct supplier is Apple.
Yep.
So it's not Amazon verified, but when I buy an iPhone 15, but I get an iPhone 13. Is it Amazon's mistake?
If you have bought it from Amazon, the contract is between you and Amazon.
Contract is being...
And if it's not what Amazon promised to give to you, then Amazon is in breach of your contract.
But what if it's not Amazon verified?
Well, it depends on the contract.
Then
So you'd have to
the
look
breach
to
of
see.
Contract is with the supplier or...
Well, if the contract is with them. But who did you pay the money to?
to Amazon.
Well, chances are then that means the contract is with Amazon. And also, if you've bought, you also have the protection of other laws that will be taught to you later this year, consumer law. But again, the question is, if you bought it from Amazon and the money went to Amazon, it's a very good sign that your contract was with Amazon. So if they sent you the phone that they didn't, that they promised to send you this phone, they sent you a different one, they're the ones that breached. They're the ones who've got to provide you with a remedy. Thank you. Okay, you're welcome. Hey.
Can you give me another example of the stock one?
Sure. Can I just sign out of this?
Yes, sure.